The FIFA World Cup in Qatar. Who is going to win it all? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Fans are being treated to some of the best footballing on the planet as teams from across the globe battle for glory at the World Cup in Qatar. It is the first Middle Eastern country to host the prestigious tournament. So far, we've had lots of thrills and a few major surprises. We begin our coverage with this report from CGTN's Dan Williams.
Well, there's a lot of build-up to the USA-England game, a lot of excitement, but in the end it ends in a draw. And what that means is Group B is now still all to play for going into the final round of games. It comes after Iran scored a famous victory over Wales 2-0. It looked like this game was heading for a draw, but the Wales goalkeeper Wayne Hennessy, he was sent off late on, and Iran made them pay with 2 injury time goals. And so it's Iran now bouncing back after that 6-2 defeat to England, and now they really have the potential of reaching the knockout rounds of a World Cup for the first time in their history very much in their sights. Elsewhere in Group A, the host Qatar, well, they crashed out of the competition with yet another defeat, this time losing 3-1 to Senegal. And what that means is that back-to-back defeats means they can no longer reach the knockout rounds. Of course, they lost 2-0 to Ecuador on the opening day of this World Cup. They do have, of course, just one further fixture to come, but that is now a dead rubber. They did at least score their first ever goal, Mohamed Muntari scoring their first ever World Cup goal. So there was something to celebrate, but real disappointment for the hosts. The other game in Group A saw Netherlands draw with Ecuador 1-1. And so what it means is that Netherlands and Ecuador, well, they topped Group A with 4 points. Senegal have 3 points, but any one of those 3 teams can still reach the knockout round. Any one of those three teams can also top the group as well. Dan Williams, CGTN, Doha.
Okay, we have lots to bring you in. Joining me now from Maryland is Bruce Murray. He played for the United States national team and scored a goal in the 1990 World Cup. Also with us from Rio de Janeiro is Tim Vickery. He is an English football journalist and panelist. Joining the discussion too is Chuka Onwumechili. He is a professor of communications at Howard University. And from Beijing, also with us is Paul Dong. He is a sports and cultural commentator for CGTN. Welcome to all of you to the show. Bruce Murray, let me start with you. Let's talk about today's game, England against the United States. As we heard our reporter tell us, that was a draw. What did you make of the game?
Oh, it was a fantastic game for the United States, if you're a fan. Obviously, maybe a little disappointing for England, but the U.S. just played with grit and determination that we haven't seen in quite some time, and made it really tough to play through the middle, and really took out some of the biggest names in the game today in terms of Raheem Sterling, the contributions, Bellingham. I mean, there was people that were missing in action for England. So, if you're a fan of the United States, it was a great result today. And sorry about the smile, but it's a great day for us.
You are allowed to smile, Bruce. But when you say grit and determination, did the U.S. go into this game as the underdogs?
Yeah, for sure. I could probably put it in one little sentence. If you watched the first game that England played and they brought over 4 subs, it was Jack Grealish, it was Phil Foden. I mean, these are world-class, high-end players. So England has a dearth of talent. We have a couple of guys in the Premier League. So, yeah, I think the grit and the determination is what pushed us over the line today.
Tim Vickery, the UK is one of the big favourites for this tournament. What did today's game tell you?
Today's game tells me that national team football is absolutely fascinating. Club football, increasingly, distances open up between giants who are competing for the silverware and the rest. In the national team game, we're seeing, as we've seen with some of these results, we're seeing an opposite dynamic. We're seeing a world in which almost anyone can beat anyone. And the United States, I thought, were probably the better side today against England. Might be a little bit of a concern for them that they've been the better side for most of their 2 games that they've played, but they've created quite few chances. But still, they're a growing force with a team that looks to do well in 4 years' time when they're co-hosting the tournament. But I think the big lesson that I'm taking from this first week of the World Cup is how wonderful national team football is, not just because there's that feeling of representation, that feeling of people being represented, but also because there's that factor of unpredictability that we've enjoyed so much during this first week.
Right, and Tim, we saw that with Argentina when they went up against Saudi Arabia, didn't we? I mean, there was a piece in the Financial Times written by Simon Cooper, their sports journalist, soccer journalist actually, and he made the point that great individual players in the Argentine team, but not as a national team.
Well, what a fantastic result for Asia, which had started the competition very badly. And the boldness of the approach of the Asian team was remarkable. Right from the start, they took risks, defending with a very high line. It could have gone wrong for them, but they made sure that the game was uncomfortable for Argentina. They stopped Argentina from playing the kind of game that Argentina wanted. And for that courage, I think they thoroughly deserved their victory. A terrific result for Asian football and a terrific result for the tournament, because we thrive on surprises like this, especially when they're deserved, when they're not done by the spoilers, by a team of bats hanging off their own crossbar. In the same spirit that Japan came back and beat Germany. A wonderful game, a wonderful result, very good for the game of football, that it's not predictable.
Chuka, African teams are well represented at this tournament. We have Senegal, they beat the host nation Qatar on Friday. Ghana just lost out to Portugal. What's your assessment so far?
I think the African teams, we're expecting a little bit more for this year. They've done well, but all of them are, as of now, kind of in a dicey position. Because we haven't had an outright case where you have a team winning their first 2 games, but we're still hopeful. And I think that really the football that's been played, the African teams have shown that they can play with anybody. You must have seen the game, I believe it was yesterday, involving Ghana. Ghana really gave a strong fight and could have tied that game at the very end. And I think the African teams, if they continue to show this confidence, then they would learn that they can play with any of these top teams. And I think that's the lesson that I have taken from these games that I have seen.
Now, I'll ask you about the same thing that I asked Tim Vickery, Chuka, and that is a lot of these players, of course, play for different clubs all around the world. How do they play together as national teams?
I think it's tough. Primarily because you have very few days that they play together. But I think one of the things that has really been very helpful is that most of these teams, even at the club size in Europe, play almost the same kind of system. So coming back and staying together for at least 1 week does help in building a team. But as you watch with these national teams, none of them really can play as clean as maybe if you've watched something like Manchester City that have many days of training together. So they do the best that they can do with the time that's given to them in terms of training together. And I think the African teams have shown that they can cope with that shortage of time in terms of building a team.
Paul Dong, one of the biggest surprises of the tournament so far was Japan beating Germany. How closely are these games being watched in Asia?
Well, at least in China was very closely followed, because the convenience of following this Qatar World Cup was the very friendly time zone arrangement. You can imagine that for people in China from Beijing to Nanjing and Guangzhou, and when you have a 6 p.m. Match from the World Cup and then followed by a 9 p.m. and even a later one at just zero, at midnight time, it would be perfect for Chinese fans to follow. And of course, when an East Asian team like South Korea and Japan competing against a former powerhouse, a former World Cup winner, it would be very, very attractive. And of course, some Chinese fans would be a little jealous to see that their former Asian competitors and rivals can come up with such huge upsets while their own national team have to stay home. But still, there is a lot of interest, and if not as much cheers, many cheers as in those Asian neighbors.
Bruce Murray, I want to get back to that game between Saudi Arabia and Argentina. Of course, Saudi Arabia beating that powerhouse, Argentina. It was one of the biggest shocks of the tournament so far. How does that actually open up the championship?
No, it's massive. Argentina has to take chances now. Saudi Arabia, and going back to Tim's point, what a great time for Asian football. I've known this a long time. I played against Japan and Korea back many times in my career. And one of the hardest things to do is track lateral quickness. And the Japanese, the Korean player, the Saudi players, they have that in spades, in bunches. And I am so happy for the recognition they're getting for the football they've been playing in the last couple of years. It's great. It's great for them. And Saudi Arabia, massive upset. But as Tim said, I mean, they're willing to take chances. And when that happens and the other team is just a little bit disjointed like England was today, anything can happen. This may be the most exciting World Cup week one I've ever seen.
Tim, some of the things we heard before the tournament started was that the way football is played in Europe is very different from the way it's played in other parts of the country. So it was likely that the cup would go to a European team or to a team that outside Europe that has a lot of its players playing in Europe.
But Europe centres the main talent from the four corners of the globe. But I think we're at an interesting moment here, with the World Cup likely to be expanded to 48 teams. Mathematically, that's a problem, but it's going to be good for the development of Africa and Asia, because you need to play successive World Cups to build experience, to develop experience. If I can take Bruce Murray all the way back to 1990, I remember watching him in that World Cup in Italy. It was the USA's first World Cup for 40 years. And in the opening game, they were overpowered by Czechoslovakia, as it then was. And they weren't bad players, the United States, but they were a little bit inexperienced. They weren't very streetwise. They didn't know when to foul. By the next game against Italy, they had already wised up, and they played a much better game against Italy, the hosts, and only lost 1-0. Now, you take that experience into the next World Cup. And if you look at the situation of Africa and Asia, they were kept out of the competition for too long. And World Cup qualification, I think this is especially true in Africa, is so competitive that very often you get 5 different nations every World Cup. So you had 5 nations last time, a different 5 nations this time. So it's very hard for these nations to acquire that experience and then carry that to the next tournament. With a 48-team competition, yes, the mathematics are hard. Yes, hosting is hard, and it will have to be done over various countries, which does dilute the essence of bringing the world together in one particular place. On the other hand, it means that you are giving opportunity for footballing nations in Africa and Asia to go to repeated World Cups, to consecutive World Cups, and acquire the kind of experience that makes them even better in the future.
Bruce, Tim raises a good point, though, or brings back a good memory for us to that 1990 World Cup. Take us through that, and how would you see today's team against the team that you played with?
Wow, it reminds me today, the performance of the teams that I played for. There's a lot of grit. We had to battle, we had to fight, we had to travel all over the world to get games. And so U.S. Soccer really put a lot into my team. But we had a lot of grit on that team. And when I watch Tyler Adams play today, and I watch Winston McKinney, and I watch some of the runs they make just to get back on defense and maybe poke a ball away, that reminds me of some of the guys I played with. So if we can play with that spirit going forward, anything's possible. But it's such a complicated World Cup, as Tim said. I mean, the Asian teams, you've got Iran, who everyone wrote off after the first game. looking great today. And of course, what's going to happen in the next game. So, these games are very difficult games. There's so much psychology involved between games. The prep, do you give the players a couple days off? Do you not? Do you let them see their family? Do you work on, the whiteboard stuff, or just not train at all? So, I mean, really, the bottom line is nobody really knows. But I will say that that they remind me very much of the United States team of the 1990s.
Tim, getting back to the World Cup right now and some of what's been happening on and off the field, the Brazilian superstar Neymar, he's been ruled out of the group stage because of an ankle injury. Is that a big setback for Brazil? Because when you look at their reserve bench, the manager has some pretty rich pickings there, doesn't he?
He does, yes, although it's a very young group of strikers, with the exception of Neymar. It's strange to think of Neymar in these terms. We tend to think of him as a perpetual adolescent, but he is now, if you like, the uncle to this young group of attackers, Vinicius Junior and Rafinha, Rodrigo, Gabriel Martinelli, and so on. They're going to have to grow up. It's to Brazil's advantage, obviously, that they have 3 points already in the bag. You cannot win the World Cup in the group phase, but you can lose it. With 3 points in the bag, another win from the last 2 games is good enough to get them into the knockout phase. They hope Neymar will be back then. In the meantime, it's time for those younger players to step up and assume responsibility. The World Cup sometimes, it can be like time speeded up. In the course of just 4 weeks, teams come together, teams fall apart, names are suddenly made, legends are created. It's up to those who remain in the Brazil side to step up to the plate and assume the responsibility of replacing Neymar.
And Tim, we've been looking at some pictures. I was looking at some pictures earlier on of the fan zones in Brazil. There are tens of thousands of people on the street, aren't there?
There are, and this is important for the country. The country is extremely politically polarised. We still have the far right over here contesting the result of the election nearly 4 weeks ago. Over the past couple of years, they've somewhat hijacked the yellow shirt. If you see someone in the streets in a yellow shirt in recent times, you've tended to assume that they are a supporter of Bolsonaro. Not yesterday. This was the first time that the yellow shirt was reclaimed by people of all political persuasions. So this World Cup, win or lose, it could well be an important healing process for what has been a very divided country.
Chuka, one of the other big superstars of this World Cup, of course, is Ronaldo, Portugal's Ronaldo. He has scored in all 5 World Cups, the only player to do so, I should say the only male player to do so. And at 37 years, this will probably be his last World Cup. How would you rate him? Where does he fit into the pantheon of all-time greats?
I think he fits in there, but I think long run, there have been probably people who grew up during this period who are rating Messi, Ronaldo as at the same level as people who grew up during my growing up years, people like Pele and Maradona. I honestly think that Ronaldo is not yet at that level. He's got to win the World Cup to get to that level. But there is no question at all that Ronaldo is a great player. He's shown that at the national team, scoring at the rate that he's scoring, even at the club level, is incredible. So there is no question that he belongs. But what I would hesitate to say is that he's at the level of, say, Maradona or Pele.
Paul Dong, we've been talking about where the game goes to from here, the future of the game. I mean, we saw the Republic of Korea in Asia. They drew with Uruguay earlier this week. I mean, how important is it for these Asian teams in the World Cup? And as Bruce told us earlier on, the next World Cup will have 48 people in the finals to grow this game in Asia.
Well, very honestly, having been following the World Cup and international soccer, starting from 1978 final in Argentina, the host nation winning over Holland. As a Chinese fan, you always hope that there will be better chances for the Chinese team to qualify into the World Cup with the only chance China took back in 2002 when the World Cup came to Asia, East Asia, creating more opportunities. But despite that, I personally don't like the idea so much of expanding, to 48 teams, and even the crazy idea of one additional World Cup in every 2 years. I'm not sure I like that idea. I think by witnessing the remarkable achievement that Asian teams can do in the World Cup from the group stage and even to the knockout stage, I think that automatically create better chances for even more berths prospectively allocated to Asian teams, maybe sacrificing some tickets from Europe. We've already got very huge market value from Euro tournaments already, and the European teams should be ready to accept the fewer chances for their national teams so that they can make room for more Asian or African teams. So yeah, I think China should focus on improving its own level instead of only hoping opportunities of more slots waiting for them.
Bruce, what about the future of the game in the United States? When you played in that team in 1990, I mean, soccer was set to take off at that point, but it still hasn't reached the level or the dominance of sports like American football or basketball. I mean, there will be a big chance in the next World Cup when the United States will be among the co-hosts, Mexico and Canada being the others. But why hasn't it taken off and become as big a sport as it should?
Well, actually, I think it's getting there. We have Premier League is the ratings are blowing hockey and basketball out of the water in my hometown of Washington, D.C. NBC getting involved with the Premier League, all the big games being shown. The game of soccer, when you go out on the weekend, you see nothing but soccer. Kids playing soccer, their parents who in 1994 maybe weren't, they were kids and they were playing soccer. So now everyone has been part of the game. You walk down the street and you run into guys, businessmen that are like, talking about Winston McKinney's no good or Tyler Adams is great. And it's unbelievable, good or bad. There is a real conversation going on here. And honestly, when it comes here in 2026, it's going to be massive. And I'm not, I'm not trying to hype it up. I don't think you have to. Over here in the United States, soccer has really taken a stronghold, and maybe the numbers aren't quite at the NFL, but it's starting to pass a couple of sports, and the numbers bear it out.
Tim, what do you make of the technology that has been brought to the game right now? We see these VAR checks all the time, and I think there's now a new automated system to check for offsides as well.
Yes, I'm old school with this. I worry about the meddling going on here. Sometimes I think that the game's administrators are running around trying to find miraculous cures for which there is no known disease. I'm not sure if clearly you gain something with the technology helping the referee, but you lose as well. You lose something from the essence of the game. And the advocates of the technology who thought that it would clear up all controversy have clearly been proved wrong. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but I'm aware that I'm sounding like an old man shouting at a cloud, because I think it's here to stay.
Chuka, what are your thoughts on the technology being used?
Actually, I think technology is very helpful. For African teams, it's really important because I go back and think about previous World Cups, even as recently as the last World Cup, where Nigeria thought that they had 2 clear penalties against Argentina that were overruled. It's important that this electronic system, the video is used because one of the things is it equalizes the playground. It leaves it out of human bias in terms of making decisions. So I think for a lot of African countries, they love it. The only question that they have about this system is this: when is it used and when is it not used? I think that controversial plays ought to be reviewed at all times. We cannot just depend on the referee. There's got to be some other people looking at this. Because these margins, as little as they may be, have decided games in the past. And so it's very important, particularly for those teams that are not regarded as big teams. It's important that these, the video is used in making sure that there is a level playground.
Yeah. Chuka, time is rapidly catching up with us, but I want to get your view on something else. When FIFA initially awarded these games to Qatar, they said one of the goals, their hopes was that this would grow the game in the Middle East. Do you think that hope will be realized after this tournament?
I think so. I think even beyond the Middle East, but Middle East in particular, because, getting the chance to host this, not just the games, but even tourism. But I think it will really grow the game. And also, let's realize that the Middle East, they've gained by Qatar hosting this tournament. Think about where Qatar in particular was, say, 10 years ago. They've set up an academy that has helped in growing young players, but also in serving other parts of the world. Like a lot of African kids go through the academy there.
Right.
So the game is being grown in those areas. I think it's of tremendous help.
Okay, time is catching up with us. As I said, I've got about 30 seconds. I'm going to go around the table now for your predictions on who's going to take the trophy, who's going to lift it up in a few weeks' time. Bruce?
Brazil.
Brazil. Tim?
Always make your predictions after the event, but who am I to disagree with Bruce? Brazil.
I think that's what you taught me the last time as well, Tim. Chuka?
That's one of my favourite lines.
Surprise, surprise. I'm still rooting for Argentina, even though they lost the opening game.
Okay, and Paul Dong, what is your prediction?
I've been quite accurate predicting champions, but I prefer to support teams, new champions. Holland, Belgium, or even Portugal. Okay. Any new team, new champions.
Okay. Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That has been The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.